Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to class. We are going to continue with what we started in the last class. We talked about language planning, major driving factors for language planning, and issues in language planning in the last class. Today, we will talk about types of language planning. As we already understood, that planning is a deliberate attempt by some authority or some agency which claims statutory authority, and it's a deliberate intervention into the form and use of a particular variety in particular domains at a different geographical location. So it's not a natural process, it is deliberate attempt to influence and regularize, in quotes, the use of language. We also looked at major driving factors for language planning like internationalization, linguistic assimilation, promoting pluralism, or vernacularization. So these are the four major driving forces, right? Where in internationalization we learned that in order to have wider communication accessibility and get opportunity in a wider domain, some non-indigenous languages are selected or approved or adopted as official language of the particular region. And the example is English in India, for that matter, in Singapore, right? In, for example, African subcontinent, multiple countries adopted English as their official language. In India also we have adopted English as associate official language of the Union of States. And English remains a very important instrument in communication between federal government, central government and provincial government or state government. So this is internationalization, what forces us or motivates us to do so. Then for linguistic assimilation, right, there are some initiatives and demands by certain groups to promote the idea of one language, one society, one nation. Specifically look at this English only movement in United States of America. So US has not declared any language to be official language, but de facto English remains official language of United States. And irrespective of their linguistic backgrounds, there is a demand that the members of the society must learn English and use English to be assimilated to American society. And this is the case with multiple languages in the world. Then the another major factor is vernacularization, where an indigenous variety is chosen to be official language and to promote and revive that language. This is more of constructing national identity. So there are multiple driving forces why we do this planning, and it is done by any agency which claims authority, a statutory authority in that region. We in India also have a robust planning. Constitution of India promotes multilingualism. Our Schedule 8 promotes and acknowledges multilingualism in the country. It includes 22 languages as official languages. They're called scheduled languages, and more than 39 applications are pending, and demands are there. People are agitating to be included, speakers of those languages to be included in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Now, today we will talk about the types of language planning, or what Bernard Spolsky prefers to use as language management. So, types of language planning. So, we are going to talk about types of language planning today. So, when we say types of language planning, there are three major categories: types, status planning, number 2, corpus planning, and number 3, acquisition planning. And they are in an order. So, for example, corpus planning assumes status planning, and acquisition planning assumes both the stages, corpus planning and status planning. So, we can have three broad categories in planning, types of planning. First is status planning, where we assign or assign a prestige value to a particular variety, and in quotes, improve the status, extend the domains of use by different initiatives. Then we move to second stage, where we have corpus planning. So, you create styles, you work on orthography, you work on grammar, create vocabulary, create thesaurus, dictionaries, and all reference materials for the use and reference of the speakers. And third is acquisition planning, which is a long-term planning, and we regulate the education policy vis-a-vis the language policy, and we try to root it in the education policy, where the young children are exposed and trained in variety of languages, and as second or third languages. So, these three types are interdependent, and they assume, the second assumes the first, the third assumes first and second. So, today we are talking about language planning, about status planning, about corpus planning, and about acquisition planning. We will go to each of these plannings by and by. So, moving on, let us first talk about status planning. It refers to a deliberate attempt of allocating value, extending function within a society, within the speech community, right? Such an initiative positively affects the status and widens the acceptability of the variety to a larger audience. And there are multiple reasons why we need to do it, why we want to do it. Because when you extend the domains of use, when you bring a particular language or a variety to the formal domains, the status of that variety is automatically updated. A prestige value is assigned. The linguistic attitude changes, and language gains currency and wider use. Speakers also construct identity associated with it, and the language has an upward mobility in the linguistic hierarchy of the region. And what can be the extended functions of language of that particular variety? It can be used in administration, governance, in education, right, in media, in judiciary, and in different formal social spaces. And it vitalizes the language, it gives a status to the language, and it changes the attitude towards the language. It creates a lot of corpus. It needs to be standardized. And the process of standardization makes the language rich and widely functional for the speakers and users of it. So this refers to status planning, where the agency, the government agency, declares by legislation or by declaring a policy by including this language in a formal domain and extending the use of it in a variety of ways. And this is how a language gains status, a language gains prestige value. Our social and linguistic attitude changes towards the language. Language becomes more acceptable, right? And it also has a very positive impact on the users of the language. It is inclusive process. It includes more varieties, right? So this is status planning. Then we move to corpus planning. So status planning is purely statutory in nature, where the government or the governing agencies announce and attribute a particular prestige and status to a particular variety of a language or a particular dialect, and that dialect becomes standard language used in various domains. Use of domains of use are extended. The speakers get a positive outlook towards the language users, and it spreads the user base. So this is a status planning, which such initiatives change the status of the language, and that's why we call it a status planning. Then we move to the second category of planning, called corpus planning. Corpus planning is extension of status planning, where it involves the act of making planning decisions for bringing about changes in the forms, the structures and use of the chosen varieties to suit the desired purpose and functions. And it requires to create a lot of reference materials, style, work on script, orthography, right, to suit the purpose of extended use of it in the formal domain. And then agencies popularize the use, and it changes the attitude, so linguistic attitude of the people. It is widely accepted and it becomes functional in various formal domains. And such activities require a lot of experts, linguists, right, language experts, who work towards creating a lot of material, reference material, style, who work on the script. They create grammar manuals, they create manuals of use, they create standard dictionaries, thesaurus, and a lot of other reference materials as a ultimate source of reference to the users and the use in the functional domain. Now, there are three processes involved in corpus planning, right? Graphization, standardization and modernization. So graphization refers to orthographic representation of language, work on that, where we standardize the script, right. Standardization refers to making it more user friendly by modifying and adding elements at all grammatical levels and making it acceptable and popularizing it by using it in formal domains. Modernization is the requirement to suit the purpose of these extended domains, where the language might require to have new vocabulary lists, new terms, new expressions, right? So there are three processes involved in corpus planning: graphization, standardization, and modernization. Now, graphization refers to development, selection, and modification of scripts and orthographic conventions for that chosen variety. Then the use of writing in a speech. So you see, writing freezes. Writing makes the text immortal, right? It freezes the rules. It frames the rules and also prescribes the rules. And it has a very long lasting, everlasting socio-cultural effects, right? So it includes easier communication or material through generations, communication with greater number of people, and a standard. It functions as a standard against all other varieties in spoken form of that particular variety. So writing makes things formal and everlasting. So that's why we work on graphization. Then we move to the process of standardization of the variety of the language, and WADO 2006 lists a lot of uh, motivating factors behind it, why it requires to be standardized. And it says, I quote, the process by which a language has been codified in some way, right? That process usually involves the development of such things as grammar, spelling books, and dictionaries, and possibly a literature. So, when we talk about the process of standardization, we will talk about the four stages, but here, just to understand that deliberate attempts are made to create a corpus of literature, to create spelling books and user manual for the language. So it works as an ultimate source for all the users of language to refer to if there is a felt deviation in the use. And he further says, it allows the language to serve as a model for everyone in the speech community to agree upon, right, in order to communicate. So it fossilizes the use of it. It regulates the use of it when we socialize and communicate. It can be employed to reflect and symbolize some kind of identity, and can also be used to give prestige to speakers and makes the language easier to teach in schools. So, because we need a standard form to teach in school, right? So, in order to maintain uniformity, this initiative, right, helps us to create a standard variety with a lot of supporting documents, corpus of literature, grammar books, spelling books, user manuals, and thesaurus, and uh, reference points, reference resources for the language use. So that's the process of standardization, that's the use of it. Then we move to the third process called modernization. And it occurs when a language needs to expand its resources to meet extended functions. For example, in science and technology, we need to accommodate new ideas, inventions, to how to encode and express inventions, new developments in that field of technology. So a whole jargon is created, right? Uh, Modernization occurs when a particular dialect is assigned extended function in a particular formal domain. So you need to have a lot of new words and expressions to be added to it to suit the purpose of use. So standardization, so the corpus planning includes these three processes, right? Modernization, standardization, and graphization. So this is corpus planning. Then we move to the third type of planning, which is a long-term planning called acquisition planning. And acquisition planning uh, presupposes or implies a status planning and corpus planning. It's a long-term planning and long-term implementation. Acquisition planning refers to creating a fresh generation of users in that language, and we do it by introducing this variety to education, early education, right? We popularize and use it in school curriculum, syllabi, we teach it as a subject, or it may become medium of instruction. Looking at Indian case, you may be familiar with trilingual formula, right? So, in order to maintain the multilingual fabric of the country, this formula was suggested in the education policy 1968, continued in 1986, and re-emphasized in NEP, National Education Policy of India 2020, which advocates education in mother tongue. And that entails a series of initiatives and activities. Because when we talk about mother tongue acquisition, mother tongue education, begging pardon, when we talk about mother tongue education, we need to have teachers, syllabi, teaching materials, right? And involvement of local communities to create the corpus to be used in the school curriculum, right? So, in a case where a government revises the corpus, new dictionaries and educational materials will be needed for use in the schools in order to maintain effective language acquisition. And it's always productive to use or to introduce such languages in school curriculum, because young generation, young children in their formative years, in the critical phase of learning, will find it easy to acquire it as second language or third language. And this is how you are increasing the user base. More and more people start using this language, standard language. Right? So, acquisition planning is a long-term planning which implies status planning and corpus planning. So, they are all related, right? And the government agency revises the education policy and introduces these newly chosen varieties in the school curriculum, maybe as just one subject or maybe the medium of instruction in the early childhood. And this entails a very positive result where the language is accepted by a wider base of users, and we create a new generation of users. We popularize it, and it becomes it comes into use in various formal domains. Education is a very effective domain where such interventions give a lot of positive result. So, the third type of planning is acquisition planning, where the newly chosen variety with modified and enriched corpus is introduced in the school curriculum, and it helps us to create a wider user base. Young children acquire it as their second language or third language. It becomes popular, right? It helps us assign prestige value to that particular variety, and it also requires a lot of additional initiatives to make it effective, to implement. So, additional initiatives like extended initiatives like When it is used as medium of instruction, it has to have sufficient reference materials, teaching materials. We require a horde of teachers, a huge number of teachers trained to teach in that particular language. Right? So we need to have trained teachers for it. So lots of initiatives needs to be who are comfortable and equipped to teach in this variety. We can also get help from local communities to create corpus for the language and create syllabi and study material, reference material in that particular language. So it gives language a lot of status, a very high prestige value and high status. It also helps create corpus of literature, right? Enriched dictionaries and a lot of reference materials. It's a long-term process with a meticulous planning. It gives a very positive result, increases the user base, widens the acceptability, and we create a whole generation of new users of that particular variety. So summing it up, we have three types of language planning. One is called status planning. The first one is a status planning where a particular variety is chosen and assigned prestige value and made popular, and the user base is extended. The functions of language, the form and the functions of language are reworked. Domain of usages are extended, and it comes into formal domain where this language is used in media, in government, in administration, and in all other social spaces. Then the second type of planning is corpus planning, where you actually need to work on the reference sources for this language, and we involve a number of experts, right, scholars, linguists to create literature, manuals, grammar books, dictionaries, thesaurus, and make it standard to be used in the newly extended domains. And this process entails three processes. The second planning called status corpus planning entails three processes: graphization, standardization, and modernization. So you need to work on the orthographic representation and script of the language. It is made simple, usable, user friendly, and popularized. Then standardization, right? We go through it goes through the process of standardization. It goes through the process of codification, right? And then finally acceptability by a wider variety of users. And the third process is called modernization, where in order to suit the purpose in various extended domains, language needs to be enriched and modified. The vocabulary needs to be modified. New dictionaries needs to be created, right? The spelling books needs to be created. The manual of user manual need to be created as a reference point to maintain uniformity and standard form. And these experts help create a lot of reference material and literature for this. Then the third planning is acquisition planning, which is a long-term initiative, and it implies the two other planning stages: number one, status; number two, corpus. Acquisition planning is a long-term initiative to create a new generation of users who acquire this particular variety as their second or third language, right? And even if they are native speaker of this variety, they learn it in a formal domain in its standard form, in quotes. And for that we need to have a series of activities entailed. Number one, creating reference material, study material for the use in a school, then creating textbooks, thesaurus, dictionaries, grammar books, right? We need to have a batch of teachers trained and equipped to teach this language either as a subject or to use this language as a medium of instruction. Then the people or the community also contributes in creating source material and syllabi and study material, right? So these are the three types of language planning we learn today: status planning, corpus planning, and acquisition planning. In coming lectures, we'll talk about the case in India, right? The language policy of India, the official languages of India, the constitutional provisions like 8th schedule in the constitution, right? We'll talk about India as a multilingual society and how uh, we have been planning and implementing these, what Bernard Spolsky says, how we are doing this language management in India. In next lectures, a series of lectures, we'll talk about them. So this is for now. Thank you.